My mother-in-law told me at her own birthday dinner that she had been trying to destroy my marriage since the year we got engaged. She said it the way you described the weather, calmly, without lowering her voice, in front of her son, my husband, and two of her closest friends, and my sister-in-law and my own mother, who had driven 4 hours to be there. She said it while passing the bread basket. She looked at me across the table and said, "Carol, I want you to know I've been trying to get Daniel to leave you since 2013. I should have tried harder." Then she asked if anyone wanted more wine. Before I tell you everything, subscribe because every story on this channel is real, it is raw, and it is worth your time. And drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one. Now let me tell you what happened. I sat at the head of that table for the remaining 40 minutes of the dinner. I passed dishes. I answered questions. I said happy birthday when the cake came out, and I helped with the candles, and I drove home with my husband in complete silence, and I put our children to bed, and then I sat in the kitchen, and I thought about everything that had happened in the previous 8 years, and I began, for the first time, to understand what had actually been happening. My name is Carol. My mother-in-law's name is Evelyn. She had been diagnosed with early-stage Lewy body dementia 7 months before the birthday dinner. I knew about the diagnosis. What I had not understood, what none of us had fully understood yet, was what it would do to her filter. Evelyn was a controlled woman, had been for the 12 years I had known her, since I first met Daniel at a mutual friend's apartment in Chicago when I was 26. She had the particular quality of certain women of her generation: immaculate presentation, very precise language, a way of expressing disapproval that never quite rose to the level of something you could directly address. You always left her company feeling slightly diminished and never quite able to say why. I had attributed this to our dynamic, to the fact that I was her son's wife and she had not chosen me. I had attributed it to the gap between her world and mine. She had grown up wealthy in a suburb of Philadelphia, her father a lawyer, her mother a woman whose primary occupation had been the maintenance of a certain kind of life. I had grown up in Cleveland, my father an electrician, my mother a pediatric nurse. I was not the daughter-in-law she had imagined for Daniel. I had always known this, and had spent 12 years, the 8 of marriage and the 4 before dating, trying to earn what I had come to understand I was never going to be given. What I had not known was the specific, active nature of what she had been doing. The birthday dinner was in October. Daniel turned to me in the car on the way home and said, "She doesn't know what she's saying. The dementia," I said. She knew exactly what she was saying. He said, "Carol," I said, "you heard her. She was very specific. She said 2013. She used the word trying. She said she should have tried harder." He was quiet. I said, "I need you to not tell me she didn't mean it." He did not tell me she didn't mean it. We drove the rest of the way home in the particular silence of two people who have just had a large object dropped into the middle of their lives and are waiting to understand the full extent of the damage. I want to tell you about the previous 8 years. Not comprehensively. 8 years is too much to compress. But in the specific moments that I had attributed to bad luck, or to Evelyn's generally cold affect, or to my own failures, that I now began to revisit in a different light. Year 1 of marriage. Daniel and I had our first serious fight. Not a small fight, a 3-day silence, the kind that settles into the joints of a relationship and you feel the ache of it for months after. The fight was about money, specifically about whether to put a down payment on the apartment we had been looking at in Lincoln Park, which was within our budget but at its outer limit. I wanted to do it. Daniel had come home from a Sunday dinner with his mother and said he thought we should wait. I had not thought much about the Sunday dinner at the time, We fought. We waited. The apartment sold to someone else. Year 2. I was pregnant with our first child. I had been offered a promotion at the firm where I worked, a significant one, managing partner track, the kind of thing I had been working toward for 6 years. I agonized over the timing. I talked to Daniel about it for weeks. He was supportive, as he always was when we talked directly. And then one evening he came home from his parents' house, just stopping by, he said, and said he'd been thinking that maybe I should turn down the promotion, that the timing with the baby was bad, that maybe we should reconsider whether we both needed to be working at the pace we were working. I took the promotion, but the conversation planted something, a seed of doubt about whether my ambition was too much, whether I was choosing career over family in a way that would cost us. Year 4. Daniel and I went through the worst period of our marriage to that point. It started over nothing, a disagreement about where to spend Thanksgiving, and escalated into something larger and uglier that I could never quite trace back to its origin. We went to couples therapy for 6 months. The therapist was good and the therapy helped, but I always had the feeling during that period that I was fighting a current I couldn't see, that for every inch of ground Daniel and I found together, something pulled us an inch back. Year 6. A woman named Sandra, who had been a friend of Daniel's from college, resurfaced in our lives. She came to a party we hosted. She was lovely, genuinely, irritatingly lovely, the kind of person it is impossible to dislike on first meeting. After the party, I felt a vague unease I could not name and did not name, because naming it would have required saying something that sounded irrational. 2 months later, Daniel told me his mother had run into Sandra at a gallery opening and had mentioned to him that Sandra had asked after him specifically. I said nothing. I stored it. Year 8. This year. The birthday dinner, the bread basket, the wine. After the dinner, after the children were in bed, Daniel and I sat in the kitchen and he said, "I need to ask you something." I said, "Okay." He said, "Did you ever feel like something was working against us? Not bad luck, something specific." I looked at him. He said, "Because I've been thinking about it since the dinner, about specific moments, and I'm wondering." I said, "Tell me one." He said, "The apartment. Year 1. Before I went to Sunday dinner with my parents, I wanted that apartment. I was certain. I came home and I wasn't certain anymore." I've thought about that moment many times and I could never explain the shift. I said, "What did she say at dinner? Do you remember?" He thought. He said, "She talked about a couple she knew, friends of hers. They had bought an apartment at the top of their budget, and then one of them lost their job, and they lost the apartment, and the marriage fell apart." He paused. "She talked about it for about 20 minutes, very specifically, case study almost." I said, "Was that the only time?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "No." We sat in the kitchen until 2 in the morning. We went through years. Not all of them. We did not have the complete picture yet, but enough. The promotion conversation, which he now remembered had been preceded by a dinner with his mother, where she had talked at length about a woman she knew who had prioritized her career over her family and lost both. The Thanksgiving fight, which had started with his mother making an offhand comment that had lodged somewhere he hadn't noticed. The period of counseling, during which, he told me now for the first time, his mother had expressed repeatedly that couples therapy was a sign the foundation was broken. Sandra, who he now admitted his mother had mentioned unprompted at least a dozen times in the 2 years following the party. I said, "Did you ever wonder why she mentioned her so many times?" He looked at the table. He said, "I think I didn't let myself wonder." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because wondering would have required me to do something about it." I looked at him for a long time. This is the part of the story where the marriage either ends or becomes something different. I want to be honest with you about which direction we went and about what it cost to go there. I was angry at Evelyn. I am still angry at Evelyn in ways that have not fully resolved and may not fully resolve while she is alive. What she did, the specific, deliberate, years-long project of undermining my marriage through careful narrative management, was a harm. It was not accidental. The birthday dinner proved that. She knew what she was doing, and she had been doing it since 2013, since before we were married, since she had decided that I was not what she wanted for her son, and had concluded that her wanting was more important than his choosing. That is a harm. It is a harm she did to her son as much as to me. He spent 8 years being managed without knowing he was being managed, having his judgments gently redirected, his certainties quietly eroded, his marriage slowly salted so that even when it was good, it had the texture of something that needed to be monitored. I was angry at Daniel, too. This is the part that is harder to articulate cleanly. He had let it happen. Not consciously, I believe that. I do not think he knew what his mother was doing. But some part of him had not wanted to know, had not questioned the shifts in his own thinking, had not noticed, or had chosen not to notice, the correlation between Sunday dinners and changed positions. He had maintained the easier story, which is that his mother was difficult but harmless, rather than the more accurate story, which would have required him to see her as someone who was actively working against his wife. We went to therapy. Different therapist from the one in year 4. I could not go back to the same one. It felt too haunted. The new therapist was a woman named Dr. Moss, who had offices in a converted brownstone in Wicker Park and a very direct manner that I found at first abrasive and then, gradually, necessary. She said in our 3rd session, "Carol, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it before Daniel does. Do you believe Daniel is a good partner who failed to protect you? Or do you believe he is a partner who fundamentally does not see you?" I sat with this. I said, "I think he is a good partner who was taught not to see me by someone he trusted." She said, "And is that a distinction that matters to you?" I said, "It's the only distinction that matters." The work was hard. The hardest part was not the anger. I knew how to be angry. I had been building toward it for years without knowing what I was building toward. The hardest part was the specific grief of revisiting 8 years with new information. Every moment that I had attributed to normal marital friction now required re-examination. Had this been her? Had that been her? The ordinary failures of a marriage becoming something more sinister in retrospect, which is its own kind of loss, the loss of the ordinary version of your own history. Daniel met with his mother 4 weeks after the dinner. He went alone, which was the right choice. Her condition meant that having me present would have added a layer of complexity that was not useful. He asked her about specific moments. He told me afterward that she had answered some questions clearly and others not at all, the dementia making her inconsistent, lucid one moment and foggy the next. But she had confirmed the apartment. She had confirmed the promotion conversation. She had confirmed Sandra. Daniel came home from that meeting and sat at the kitchen table and said, "She said she did it because she loved me." I said, "I know." He said, "That's not an excuse." I said, "I know that too." He said, I'm sorry. I want to say it specifically. I'm sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I didn't protect you from it. I'm sorry I made it easier for her by not asking the questions I should have asked. I looked at him. He looked back at me. I said, I accept that. And I meant it. Not as a closing of the matter. There was more work ahead. There is still more work. But as a statement of genuine acceptance. He was sorry. The sorry was earned, meaning he had had to look directly at his own participation before he could say it. That kind of sorry is different from the kind you offer to discharge discomfort. He was not discharging. He was standing in it. We are still married. I want to be clear about that because the story deserves a clear answer on that question. We are still married, and the marriage is different than it was. Not worse, I think, and in some ways better, in the specific way that things which have been tested and survived the testing become more load-bearing than they were before. Evelyn is in memory care now. Her condition progressed faster than the doctors initially anticipated. She has good days and bad days, which is the language the facility uses. And on the good days, she sometimes knows who I am and sometimes does not. And on the bad days, she mostly does not. The last time she knew me was 4 months ago. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had come alone. Daniel had a meeting he could not move. And she was having a good day, which the nurses told me before I went in. She was sitting by the window. She looked at me when I walked in and she said my name clearly, with recognition. I sat down next to her. She looked at me for a while. Then she said, "You stayed." I said, "I stayed." She said, "I didn't think you would." I said, "I know." She looked out the window. She said, "He loves you. He always loved you. I just..." She stopped. The sentence did not complete itself. I sat with the incomplete sentence for a long time. Then I said, "I know, Evelyn." She turned and looked at me. Her eyes were clear in the way of someone who is, in this moment, entirely present. She said, "I'm sorry." I believed her. I have thought about this moment many times since, and I keep arriving at the same place. I believed her. Not because the apology resolved the 8 years, or because it made the harm smaller, or because it gave me something I had been waiting for. I believed her because she was a woman who, for a few seconds on a Tuesday afternoon, was able to see clearly what she had done and say the 2 words that named it. And that is a harder thing than it sounds. I said, "I know." And then I sat with her by the window for another hour, and we watched the courtyard and did not say much else. And when I left, I kissed her on the top of her head, and she patted my hand. My daughter is 12 now. My son is 9. They go to see their grandmother twice a month. I take them most of the time, and Daniel takes them the other times, and sometimes we all go together. They know she is sick. They know her mind is changing. They do not know the full history, and they will not know it until they are old enough to hold it, which I will determine when the time comes. What I know, standing on the other side of this particular 8 years, is something I would not have believed at the birthday dinner, when the breadbasket was being passed and the world was rearranging itself around Evelyn's words. You can survive being sabotaged. You can survive the discovery that the sabotage happened. You can look directly at the damage and assess it honestly and decide which of it is repairable and which of it is permanent, and live with both answers. You can be angry at someone and also, in a limited and specific way, understand them. You can stay in a marriage after learning it was undermined and have the marriage become something that was built by the two of you consciously, rather than inherited from whatever the two of you were before you knew what had been happening. None of this is easy. All of it is possible. My husband and I had dinner last Friday, just the two of us, at a restaurant we like in the neighborhood. We talked about the kids and about work and about a trip we are planning for next spring. At the end of the dinner, he looked at me and said, "I'm glad you stayed." I said, "I'm glad I stayed too." And I meant it in the full, complicated way, not the simple version, which would be easier to say and less honest, but the version that contains the 8 years and the birthday dinner and the breadbasket and the Tuesday afternoon in the memory care facility and everything that has happened since. The whole of it. I meant it in the whole of it. That is the marriage we have now, built from what we found and what we chose. It is not the marriage I thought I was in for 8 years. It is the one we built when we finally knew what we were working with. I would not trade it. There is one more thing I want to tell you. Something I have not said to anyone except Dr. Moss. In the first weeks after the birthday dinner, in the early morning hours when I could not sleep and I was sitting with everything I had just learned, I spent a significant amount of time in the particular grief of not having been seen. Not just by Evelyn, by everyone. By Daniel, who had not seen his mother's behavior for what it was. By myself, who had spent 8 years attributing my own sense of being subtly undermined to my own inadequacy, to the gap between my world and Evelyn's world, to the standard friction of a daughter-in-law relationship with a difficult mother-in-law. I had told myself that story so many times, the story where Evelyn's coldness was just her nature, not her intention. The story where my feeling of fighting an invisible current was just the normal difficulty of marriage. The story where the promotion doubt and the apartment hesitation and the Thanksgiving escalation were just the ordinary texture of two people figuring out how to be two people. I had believed that story because it was easier than the accurate one. And the accurate one, when it arrived, sitting across a breadbasket on a birthday, was not easier. It was specific and cold, and it required me to revise everything. But here is what I have come to understand about that revision. It was also a kind of gift, because once I knew what had actually happened, I could stop wondering if I was the problem. I had spent 8 years in various ways and at various levels of awareness, wondering if I was the problem. Too ambitious, too working class, too much. The specific flavor of wondering that comes from living alongside someone who does not want you there but never says so directly. Once I knew, the wondering stopped. Not immediately. It takes time to dislodge something that has lived in you for 8 years. But eventually. The wondering stopped because I had the accurate answer. And the accurate answer was not me. I was not the problem. I was the target. And there is a very different thing about knowing you were a target versus believing you were a failure. One of those things has a source outside you, which you can name and address and eventually set down. The other just lives in you, eating quietly, with no external source to identify, which means no way to stop it. I know which I would rather have. Dr. Moss said to me near the end of our time together, "The thing that is striking about how you've handled this is that you didn't collapse and you didn't harden. Most people do one or the other. They either fall apart or they calcify. You just kept walking." I said, "I didn't have a choice." She said, "You always have a choice. That's the point." She was right. I had the choice to leave, and I chose to stay. I had the choice to never tell Daniel, and I chose to tell him. I had the choice to let the anger define everything going forward, and I chose, slowly and imperfectly and over many months, to not let it define everything. These were choices, made in the dark, in kitchen chairs, in the passenger seat of a car going home from a birthday dinner. But choices. I made them. That is also part of the story. My marriage is mine. It is not the one his mother tried to manage into dissolution. It is not the marriage I thought I was in for 8 years. It is the one we made when we finally saw each other clearly, without the current we had not known we were swimming against. I find it, most days, enough. More than enough. On the best days, the Friday dinners, the trips, the ordinary Tuesday evenings when the kids are in bed and the house is quiet, and Daniel and I are just two people who have been through something and are still here, I find it exactly what I wanted. That is what I kept. That is what she could not take. There is something else I want to tell you about the specific texture of the anger in the months after the birthday dinner, because I think it is useful to name it clearly. The anger had layers. The first layer was the obvious one, directed at Evelyn, hot and specific and, in the early weeks, very close to the surface. This layer was easy to identify and in some ways easy to manage because it had a clear source and a clear name. Evelyn. What she did. 8 years of it. The second layer was harder. This one was directed at myself. I had not seen it. For 8 years, across dozens of moments, I had not seen what was happening. I am not a naive person. I am not someone who lacks for perceptiveness. I have built a career in labor law that depends entirely on the ability to identify what is actually happening beneath what is being presented. I had spent 8 years professionally reading between lines and personally failing to read the lines that were right in front of me. I processed this failure for a long time. Why had I not seen it? The answer I arrived at, eventually, and with Dr. Moss's help, is not flattering. I had not seen it because seeing it would have required me to act on it, and acting on it would have meant a confrontation with a truth I was not ready to hold. The truth that the woman my husband called every Sunday and visited every week had been working against me since before I was his wife. That truth had consequences. For my marriage, for Daniel's relationship with his mother, for the children, for everything. And so some part of me, the part that was managing the livable version of the situation, had kept the curtain drawn. This is not unique to me. People do this. We maintain the story that keeps the structure standing, rather than the story that requires us to examine whether the structure should stand. It is not weakness. It is the ordinary human management of what can be held at a given moment. What I have come to accept is that I was managing all I could manage, that the perceptiveness I applied at work was available to me at home, but that I had, for entirely human reasons, declined to use it in the specific direction that would have destabilized everything. I do not fully forgive myself for this, but I understand it. And understanding it has made the anger at myself quieter, if not absent. The third layer of anger, the one I was least prepared for, was directed at no one in particular. It was the anger of the counterfactual, the what if. What if I had taken the apartment in year 1? What if I had understood the promotion conversation for what it was? What if we had never gone through the year 4 counseling, which we probably would not have needed if the subtle erosion had not been happening? What if the marriage we had built in the absence of Evelyn's interference would have been larger, easier, more grounded in our actual preferences rather than in the reflexive correction away from positions she had quietly destabilized? I will never know the answers. This is the specific cruelty of the counterfactual. It offers the question, but withholds the answer entirely. I can construct the apartment we bought version of my life, the promotion I took without doubt version, the year 4 we never needed counseling version. I can construct them, and I cannot inhabit them. They are inaccessible alternate histories that I can name but not enter. I have made peace with this imperfectly, and accept that the imperfect peace is the only one available. The marriage I have is the one I have. The 8 years happened as they happened. What comes next is built from the actual materials. Daniel's sister, whose name is Paula, called me 3 weeks after the birthday dinner. She had been at the dinner. She had heard everything. She had said nothing at the dinner itself. None of us had in the immediate shock of it, but she called 3 weeks later. She said, "I need to tell you something." I said, "Okay." She said, "I knew. Not everything, not the specific things she was doing, but I knew she was doing something. I could feel it. And I never said anything to you or to Daniel because..." She stopped. "Because she's my mother, and saying it would have meant facing it, and I wasn't ready to face it." I said, "I understand." She said, "Does that make it better or worse?" I thought about it honestly. I said, "Neither. It makes it more complicated." She said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I believe you." Paula and I have a different relationship now than we did before. Closer in some ways, because we have had a more honest conversation than we ever had in 11 years of being sisters-in-law. More complicated, because the honesty required both of us to stand in an uncomfortable place that we had both previously avoided. There is a particular quality to relationships that have been through that kind of honesty, a density that easier relationships don't have. I value it. I also recognize it required Evelyn's birthday dinner to exist, which is, I suppose, the strangest of all the strange things about this story. The disease that removed Evelyn's filter also removed the barrier that had been keeping her family from seeing each other clearly. She said the thing she had been not saying for 8 years, in front of 8 people, over a bread basket, and in doing so, broke something open that had the eventual effect of making the people around her slightly more honest with themselves and each other. I do not know what to do with that. I am not going to attribute positive meaning to what Evelyn did for 8 years, or to what the dementia is doing to her now. I am not going to construct a narrative where everything happens for a reason, or where the harm was necessary to produce the clarity. That is too clean for what this actually is. But I will say, the clarity is real. The honesty that emerged from the birthday dinner, between me and Daniel, between me and Paula, between me and myself, is real. It did not come from a good source. It is still real. My son asked me last month why we visit Grandma Evelyn when she doesn't always remember us. He is 9, and he asks exactly the questions you would expect a 9-year-old to ask, which are always the hardest ones. I said, "Because she's family, and family shows up even when it's hard." He thought about this. He said, "Even if the person did something bad?" I looked at him. He is perceptive in the specific way of children who have been listening to adult conversations they were not supposed to hear, or have simply been paying attention in a household where complicated things were happening. I said, "That's a harder question. What do you think?" He said, "I think you show up, but maybe differently than before." I said, "I think that's exactly right." He nodded and went back to whatever he had been doing. Showing up differently than before. That is, I think, the most accurate description of where I am. I show up to the memory care facility. I show up to my marriage. I show up to the friendship with Paula that is harder and more honest than it was. I show up differently in each of these places, with more information, with eyes more open, with a clearer sense of what I am walking into and why. The difference is not performance. It is not the performance of a woman who has decided to be fine. It is the actual disposition of a woman who has looked at what happened, understood it as fully as it can be understood, grieved the parts that required grieving, and decided to keep building. Keep building. That is the instruction I have given myself in various formulations through the last year and change. When the anger is loudest, keep building. When the counterfactual whispers, keep building. When the Tuesday afternoon at the memory care facility loops back in my mind, she stayed. I didn't think you would. Keep building. The building is the point, not the destination, not the arrival at some state of resolution or peace or clarity. The daily act of constructing the life you want from the materials you have. I have good materials. I have a husband who looked at what he had failed to see and chose to see it and chose to stay. I have 2 children who are perceptive and curious and who will, I am raising them to be, the kind of people who ask the hard questions and sit with the complicated answers. I have a career that I built without letting anyone tell me it was too much. I have a marriage that was tested from the outside over years, and that survived the testing and became something I chose rather than something I inherited. These are good materials. I am building. There is a Friday evening I want to describe, 2 months ago. Ordinary in the way that the best evenings are ordinary. Nothing special was planned. Nothing significant was supposed to happen. Daniel had gotten home early. The kids were doing homework. I was making dinner. Nothing elaborate, pasta, the quick weeknight kind. And he came into the kitchen and stood in the doorway the way he sometimes does, just standing, watching me for a moment before saying anything. He said, "Can I help?" I said, "You can open the wine." He opened the wine. He poured 2 glasses. He handed me mine and leaned against the counter, and we were both quiet for a minute. The particular quiet of 2 people who are comfortable enough together that silence does not need to be filled. Then he said, "I've been thinking about what it cost you." I looked at him. He said, "The 8 years, what it cost you specifically, not the marriage, not the abstract damage. What it cost you to be in a situation that was working against you and to not know why, and to keep trying anyway." I said, "You don't have to." He said, "I want to say it. I want to name it specifically, because I think I've been sorry in a general way, which is not the same as being sorry for the particular thing." I put down the spoon. He said, "It cost you the apartment you wanted. It cost you 2 years of questioning a promotion you earned. It cost you a year of counseling for a marriage that didn't need counseling for the reasons we thought it did. It cost you years of wondering if you were too much when you were exactly right. That is what it cost you. That is what I am sorry for." I stood in my kitchen with the pasta water coming to a boil, and I looked at my husband, and I felt something settle that had been not quite settled for more than a year. Not because the sorry fixed the cost. You cannot refund 8 years. You cannot give back the apartment or the unclouded promotion or the years of wondering. The cost was paid, and it stays paid. But the seeing of it, the specific named seeing, that was something. That was him choosing to look at the full scope of what had happened and not look away from it and say it out loud so that I could hear it. I said, "Thank you." He said, "I mean it." I said, "I know you do." We made dinner. The kids came down. We ate at the table and talked about the ordinary things families talk about at tables on Friday evenings. And it was, in the ways that matter most, completely normal. This is the marriage we have now, built by two people who finally know what they are building with. It has the weight of everything that happened, and it has the solidity of having been chosen, deliberately, in full knowledge. I would not trade it. I will say that one more time because it is still surprising to me, a year out from the birthday dinner, that it is true. I would not trade it. Not for the version of the marriage I thought I was in for 8 years, the one that felt lighter but was actually being steadily undermined. Not for the simpler story. Not for the one where Evelyn was just difficult, where Daniel just needed prompting sometimes, where the current we were swimming against was just ordinary marital friction. I want the real version, the fully informed, eyes open, everything on the table version. The one that is harder and heavier and more honest. This one. This is the one I am keeping.